What do the Denver Broncos and Sean Payton have to avoid this offseason as it pertains to potential contract drama with one of their top players set to hit free agency? You get that and much more from the South Stands to the end zone on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Just want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in, making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. You can get this podcast free and available everywhere you get your podcasts in audio format, or you can watch on YouTube. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Broncos news, content coverage, and more. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host and good friend, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, my friend, Radio Row continues to buzz here in Phoenix as we approach this episode on Thursday. You was able to sit down with Emmanuel Sanders, Patrick Surtain to pick their brains. We'll get some more recap going into next week's Lockdown Broncos as it pertains to that. But, man, it's busy here at Radio Row, and there is plenty of buzz about the Denver Broncos hiring of Sean Payton, Russell Wilson, and other things. But I feel like we should probably dive into things that Sean Payton and the Denver Broncos must avoid this offseason as it pertains to some potential contract drama that could be coming up for them in particular.
That's right, Cody. I agree with you on that. And I don't know exactly what this is going to look like. And we've been seeing some, liked tweets on Twitter and, different things like that, people we like to overreact to that a little bit. It's kind of fun nowadays to look into what players are liking on Twitter and the things that they're saying. But Dre'Mont Jones, Cody, is one of those guys that, he really reminds me of Derek Wolfe. For anybody that covered the Broncos or followed the Broncos closely when Derek was playing, just anytime he gets up to the mic, you better have the bleep button ready. You better be ready for a short answer. You better be ready for a hard answer because he tells it like it is. He doesn't, he certainly doesn't mince words. Let's put it that way. But I think with Dre'Mont Jones, a very similar personality, somebody that it's kind of hard to get a read on. He's not a very rah type of person, especially when it comes to right now with the Denver Broncos. Remember, just a few months ago, back in the fall, he was asked, are you going to be a Bronco long-term? Do you want to be a Bronco long-term? And he was like, I'm a Bronco right now. And those kind of things send the fan base into a frenzy of well, does he want to play with the team? Well, recently he's been liking some tweets that are making people wonder, does he want to be a Bronco? Is he frustrated with the Broncos? Will he be here long term? We know that his situation is this. His contract is expiring. He's going to be a free agent if the Broncos don't act here in the next month, Cody, which is crazy to think about. We're already almost to NFL free agency here. But he's either going to be a free agent or the Broncos are going to franchise tag him or they're going to re-sign him. One of those three things is going to happen. So what I'm talking about and what we're talking about here and avoiding is, do you want the Broncos to franchise tag Dre'Mont Jones and risk the drama of what it would be to franchise tag him and let him play on that tag instead of getting a long-term deal done or tagging and trading him? What's your thoughts, Cody, on kind of that, letting guys play on the franchise tag in general, but maybe even more specifically also too with Dre'Mont Jones?
For me, I'm 110% supportive of players not playing on the franchise tag, right? If they get tagged, we've seen it with guys that have done that essentially. I think I'm trying to remember the more recent player to do that, but the one that comes to mind to me was, in a sense of, playing on the franchise tag and getting hurt. I think back to Earl Thomas. Remember when he was with the Seahawks and he played on the franchise tag and broke his leg. And there was some other stuff that's happened with Earl Thomas that's kind of equated to him not being in the NFL. But, for a guy like Dre'Mont, I look at him as he's a dominant force on the defensive interior. In 13 games this season, he had 16 quarterback pressures. People, I think, overlook how important pressures are. Dre'Mont is, as you mentioned, he's the, hard hat lunch pail guy When he shows up on the football field, it's all about business. It's all about dominating. It's about eating somebody else's lunch. I mean, he reminds me a lot of Debo in a sense of just how he plays. Like bully ball mentality is how Dre'Mont Jones plays football, and Denver needs that. Denver, I think, has an edge when you have that with that guy. And, I think some of the other things that have been highlighted too is, when Randy Gregory went down and, you trade away Bradley Chubb, of course, like your pass rush in general aren't going to be what you wanted it to be because you have other guys who just simply haven't evolved their pass rushing repertoire yet on the outside. That's going to free things up. So a lot of teams were focusing on DJ Jones and Dre'Mont Jones. For me, Dre'Mont Jones deserves to get paid. I know Spot Track has like a 3-year, I think $21 million extension is his estimated market value. So like about 7.2. For me, I look at it, maybe that's because this past year was his first year as a full-time starter in the NFL. Dre'Mont Jones is a very, very good defensive lineman that can play a defensive end on the outside. He can play on the defensive interior. Sayre, in today's NFL, you need that. So if you franchise tag, if you're the Broncos, if you're going to franchise tag Dre'Mont, you have to do whatever you can. You have to say, hey, we are going to find a way to get this deal done by July 15th, which is usually the deadline. But there has to be some good faith there. And I think that's something that Dre'Mont is looking for. You do that, and like I said, I don't know if Dre'Mont would risk playing on the franchise tag. I mean, you're going to get paid a lot of money doing it because it rises up nearly to $20 million this year. But I mean, does even Denver want to pay $20 million for 1 year potentially? I don't think they want to. I think that there's better uses of their financial capital that they can look at, especially even on the offensive line. They have to address that. So for me, I'm supportive of Dre'Mont. Like if they franchise him, I'm supportive of him not playing on it because I think Dre'Mont's value as a player speaks for itself. And, you can't go into something with no risks. And I think this whole situation, like even looking at Damar Hamlin's not a vested veteran in the NFL. He doesn't have that long-term protection, but he had that thing happen to him, obviously in that very scary situation. And financially from the NFL side of things, like he's not protected. But luckily, I mean, everyone's so supportive of it. Maybe it'll implement change, but I'm all for players protecting themselves.
Absolutely, Cody, 100%. And the tough thing about it is, up to this point, I mean, Dre'Mont Jones' career earnings just over $4 million. So, talking about the potential of turning down nearly 5 times that much for 1 year's worth of work, that's what makes the franchise tag such a difficult thing, right? It's like it's almost like blackmailing a player into playing, and risking getting hurt, risking their long-term status because you're like, hey, we're going to 5x your career earnings in 1 year with this franchise tag. And I think for Dre'Mont Jones, the situation is odd, right? Because the franchise tag is so high. And like you said, Spot Track has his, average annual value at around 7 million, which I find that actually surprised me quite a bit, Cody. That's really low. I think even DJ Jones, who wasn't really a pass rush phenom in San Francisco, I think he got like 10 or 11 million per year. So I figure Dre'Mont is going to be upwards of 14, 15, 16 maybe million per season. And certainly he's going to feel deserving of that. And I think his guarantees on a new contract are going to be more than the franchise tag. So it's such a weird thing because me personally, the way that I read Dre'Mont Jones as a guy, I feel like there could be some trouble there if you force him to play on the franchise tag. Not that he's going to be disruptive in the locker room, not that he's going to be, whatever you want to call that. I think that it's just one of those things where you don't want somebody who's really unhappy to be where they are, who doesn't want to be in that work culture, just like we talked about with Ejiro Evero, right? I mean, it would have been great to have him back, maybe the best man for the defensive coordinator job, but didn't want to be in Denver, wanted to go work somewhere else because, for a variety of reasons. So if the case is the same with Dre'Mont Jones, do you want that guy there who doesn't want to be there, right? And I'm not trying to put words in his mouth. I'm just asking the question. I'm just wondering if you franchise tag him and he doesn't want that, and he wants to go get a deal somewhere else, could you look to replenish maybe your draft capital and trade him to somebody and utilize that cap space, like you mentioned, on maybe finding different ways to fill that hole?
I think that's a great point. It's a great other side to look at here in this situation because, as we all know, NFL teams, they've always said it's always a business, and teams don't always show loyalty towards players the way that maybe players would like to show loyalty towards a franchise. I understand that 110%. But you know what? There's also some other things that I wonder. And what will Sean Payton's tenure look like with the Denver Broncos? What are we hoping to see in this period with a 5-year contract? You'll get that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends at Blue Nile, and Valentine's Day is coming up, which means romance is in the air more than usual. And I don't need to tell you lovebirds that. You've probably already had your date plans on the calendar for weeks, but have you found the perfect Valentine's Day gift yet? Whether you're celebrating this day of romance or whether you're ready to pop the question, you can find jewelry as unique as she is with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. At BlueNile.com, you can find the perfect piece of jewelry for live special moments or even create the custom engagement ring of her dreams. Their simple online tools let you choose the diamond shape, size, and clarity, as well as the setting style. And Blue Nile's bench jewelers will then handcraft the perfect piece to your specifications. Blue Nile's diamond price guarantee allows you to compare a competitor's diamond against one of theirs, and Blue Nile can even meet or beat their price. Every order is insured and arrives quickly in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shipping is free, and so are returns. So right now, you can save up to 50% at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com for up to 50% off. BlueNile.com. And our good friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook, the other sponsor of today's episode of the show. And this year, the only app that you need at your Super Bowl party this Sunday is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And we're really excited about our new sports betting partner here at Locked On, and because they're the #1 sportsbook in America, and that is FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better because they have so many great features that make betting on sports super fun and easy for you. Download FanDuel now so you can bet Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet, and you'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who will score a touchdown. Who will score the first touchdown in Super Bowl 57? They let you take advantage of that. And the FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. And best of all, you get paid your winnings instantly. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/Locked On to claim your no-sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/Locked On. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Sayre, continue on today's conversation here, Locked On Broncos. Once again, Broncos Country, thank you so much for tuning in. Whether you get this podcast free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format, or whether you're watching on YouTube, we appreciate you so much for rocking with us throughout this offseason. We have a lot of things in store, especially with free agency coming up, the NFL draft. We'll see how the Broncos maneuver through that without a first or second round pick. Could they add more draft capital by that time? So many things to ponder and look at, and we'll get you covered here, Locked On Broncos, every single day, all year long, because for the true fan, there is never an off season. Continuing on our conversation here, Sayre, some of the things we wanted to dive into that we hope to see during Sean Payton's tenure, right? And I think the most cliche thing will be win games, right? Or get to the playoffs. But I think that while we can acknowledge those are important, those are things that we would like to see. What are some tangible stuff that we want to see as well as it pertains to the Denver Broncos in general under Sean Payton?
Well, Cody, we gotta want to see the Broncos beat the Kansas City Chiefs, right? I mean, everybody wants to see that happen again. It hasn't happened since 2015, early in the season. So you want to see the Broncos beat the Chiefs. That's a very short-sighted, hey, this is what we want. This is our wish list, right, from Sean Payton. But it's important. You're right, it is. And I think that my number one thing, and I hope for a lot of other people as well, getting this offense back to a point where it's dominant. Remember the 2013 offense where you basically drew a name out of a hat and that guy had 10 touchdowns on the 2013 Broncos offense. I mean, it was fun to watch, and it's fun to watch the Broncos when they're competing every single week. And that just hasn't been the case in recent years, right? So you really want to see this team take that step forward in a big way offensively under Sean Payton, really reestablish itself as a true offensive identity team. Not to say the defense can't stick around. We would love to have a balance of both, but really get the offense back to a point where the Broncos are, legitimized in the eyes of everyone, because it's like, okay, we got to face this offense this week. That's what I want to see the Broncos become again under Sean Payton.
I think that's probably one of the most important things, right? Because we've seen dominant defense since Super Bowl 50. I mean, not quite to the lengths that Super Bowl 50 defense was, which is crazy because yesterday I sat down with Brandon Marshall, former Broncos linebacker, and just it was kind of reflecting on the anniversary of Super Bowl 50, which was a few days ago, however many years ago at this point. He joined us. He said, we just had a really special team that year. And he said, for us, we kind of knew defensively going into training camp that Payton looks different. Payton, why does Kubiak have him under center? Like changing things up a little bit. And he said, we knew for us defensively, we had to be better. But he said, you know what? One thing that we said the night before Super Bowl 50, we had a team meeting. Peyton Manning spoke and it was emotional. DeMarcus Ware spoke and it was emotional. And he said, for us in that locker room, the defensive guys, we all said to ourselves, let's go win a ring for Peyton. Let's go win a ring for DeMarcus Ware. Like it was for those guys, but also for each other, right? They said that they were a tight-knit unit. And I want the Broncos to get back to that, right? To the point, like I said, I think the locker room culture in Denver right now, Sayre, I think is very good. Talking to players, like so many of these guys spend so much time together in groups, as teammates. And they go, they do things. They go bowling together. They go to the movies. They all, they host dinners with their families. Like that's a really, really cool thing that I think needs to be touched on even more. But I think it's like, how can you also build that, into translating that into success on the football field? To me, I think that is a huge thing we want to see. But I also want to see a culture that gets restored under Sean Payton, right? And it's going to not just be it's not going to be Sean Payton just solely responsible. It's up to players. It's up to the organization to provide the pieces necessary. But I would like to see in Sean Payton's 5-year tenure that the Broncos are always in the conversation. I want to see that they're in the conversation for the playoffs this year. They're in the conversations to potentially contend. I know it's a tough task. I know there's so many things that have to go right in order to make that happen, but it is possible. We've seen it happen before in the National Football League, and the Broncos do seem like they mean business.
They do, Cody, and it's no coincidence. For those who are just listening, not watching, I wore one of my my most treasured possessions today, my Chicago Cubs World Series hat. You can't really see the side patch there, but I actually, Cody, I purchased this hat preemptively. I purchased this hat when they were down in the series against the Cleveland Indians at the time. And the thing that you're talking about is exactly what I was going to say as well. I mean, we look at this Broncos team right now as they're cellar dwellers in the AFC West. We look at this as, man, it's going to take a lot to get them out in this, the drudgery that is the AFC West against Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert. Well, back in, the early 2010s, the mid 2010s, it was the same way for the Chicago Cubs. And you hire this GM, Theo Epstein, he comes in, he starts drafting guys. Chris Bryant, he makes a trade for Anthony Rizzo. For those that don't know baseball, obviously I'm just throwing names that mean absolutely nothing to most of you here right now. But what I'm saying is that you built something special, not necessarily just from the ground up, but you start bringing in that different culture like Cody's talking about, culture of guys who are there to win, who are there to restore that tradition, who are there to restore that franchise to its prominence, to its dominance. I think that's what Sean Payton said was one of the things that meant the most to him in terms of getting to the Denver Broncos. Is like, he's like, as opposed to the 2006 Saints, this is a team that's won. This is a fan base that knows what winning is like. They know what it's like and they expect it, and he welcomes that. So, Cody, I view that as number one. I mean, the whole Cubs analogy and all those things like that, it's like, get this team out of the darkness, get this team out of the hole. It's not 100+ years for the Broncos like it was for the Cubs, but it's like, okay, things have been going the same way for a long enough time now. We've been in this carousel of the quarterback, the head coach. Now you need somebody to lead you out, and that's what I hope Sean Payton is able to do for the next 5 years.
That's a great message there, but I just have to say, how dare you wear so many different hats and one that's not a Denver Broncos hat? I'm being sarcastic for those of you who aren't actually watching but are listening. Sayre gets slack from so many different fans, like, why are you wearing that hat? Sayre's a hat collector, folks. We've already made this very clear. He's got a lot of hats, but yes, you know what? I think that's a fantastic message. I think it's important, and hopefully the Broncos can get back there at some point, and hopefully it starts within the next 5 years. I think that's ideal for the timeline that has been presented. But Broncos Country, Radio Row is buzzing about Sean Payton, about the Denver Broncos, and even Russell Wilson. What are we going to hear from former players like Brandon Marshall, Jake Plummer, and others? You'll get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, ladies and gentlemen, today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, is brought to you by our friends at TurboTaxes. And go to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Meet with an expert who will do them for you. TurboTax experts can relieve you from the stress of taxes and file for you so you can do not taxes. Show your eyes things that are not taxes. Unpack a moving box of not taxes. Taste not taxes. Sing not taxes a lullaby. And hope not taxes sleeps through the night. Grab a saddle and ride not taxes into the sunset. With TurboTax, an expert will do your taxes from start to finish, ensuring that your taxes are done right, guaranteed, so you can relax. Feels good to be done with your taxes, doesn't it? Come to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. Intuit TurboTax, full service products only. Video meeting while expert does your taxes required. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. As we continue on today's episode, Locked On Broncos Radio Row is always a big thing every year leading up to the Super Bowl. You get a chance to go out there and see so many different players from various teams, including the Denver Broncos. You also get to see some former greats as well. And that has been the vibe at Radio Row. Sayre, I'll tell you this. Yesterday at Radio Row, sitting at my table, we have several interviews that are booked. We see Brandon Marshall, we grab him, we talk to him. It was a great conversation. People can get that at milehighsports.com if they want to hear it. Run into our good friend Mike Kliss, man, because we got the DNVR people right next to us, and then Mike Kliss is wandering around. I'm like, hey Mike, what's up? Like, Mike's an awesome dude. Love Mike Kliss. But there were other people going around that are former Broncos greats, and I think one of them, we'll talk about what Brandon Marshall said, but even Jake Plummer had a lot to say about the Broncos state of things, and Sean Payton now coming over. And, what were some of your interesting takeaways from, even what Kliss was able to interview from Jake Plummer?
Yeah, I think that just first and foremost, it's always fun to see Jake Plummer. We always talk about how when he played, he would look like a mountain man. He was growing the long hair and the big beard and those type of things. And it's great to see that, nothing's really changed for him. He looks like, man, that guy could throw up a tent and absolutely throw a great party up in the mountains at some point. The handball champion of the world, Jake Plummer, but obviously still very, very keen football eye. I found it interesting that he only went to or watched one Broncos game this past year. And he's like, I didn't even see Russ play. He was like, I watched Brett Rippon. I thought he did a great job. So there's a nice endorsement for Brett Rippon from one of the best quarterbacks to ever play for the Denver Broncos. Let's give Jake Plummer some kudos on here. I didn't have a podcast in 2005, Cody, but man, I certainly rocked my number 16 jersey with pride. I love Jake Plummer and watching him play. And quite frankly, there's more that the Broncos could do that he did now to be successful. And he talked about that, right? He talked about the fact that, can you go have a beer with your defensive line and then go out, to a thing with your special teams? Like, in terms of player leadership, he's like, you can change the coach all you want. You can change this, that, and the other all you want. But he's like, the players need to step up and do their job. And I think that's one of the things that's very interesting that not many people are talking about. How many players on this Broncos roster have kind of gotten used to losing? We know they hate it, but when you get used to losing, I don't know what that's like in a locker room, Cody. I think that what have we heard players say? Just like losing is contagious, winning is contagious. So Jake Plummer's talking about the players need to get this thing going. They're the ones that are out on the field. They're the ones that are executing. They're the ones that are responsible for changing things if the Broncos are going to get back to a winning way.
I think that's a fair point to make. And look, Jake knows all about winning. I mean, for him, I always hated how things ended with Jake in Denver. I felt like he got kind of the raw end of the deal, as much as we were excited to see a young Jay Cutler. But Jake has a lot of great points on it. For him, kind of removing himself from the game aspect and just being able to watch it and analyze what's going on. I mean, he's spot on, and look, Russ has to be, I think, what people determine or view as like an authentic leader. Like, there's times where people are like, is that authentic or is that, just like an act? And I think that's a fair criticism of Russ. People thinking like, is that the case? But I could tell you firsthand, I've seen him interact with guys like Justin Simmons in the locker room. Like, these guys, Justin and Russ, they're very close and they talk and they try to, kind of be the voice of reason in the locker room, which I understand. And, so there is that element to it. Another thing as well, I bumped into Pat McAfee. Pat McAfee was, he's like, oh, yeah, I was covering the Broncos this year. And I was like, yeah, it wasn't the year anybody expected. He's like, well, it should be better next year, right? Especially with Sean Payton. That's a huge get for him. So shout out to Pat McAfee for that. But there's a lot of people talking about the Broncos here at Radio Row, and I think the major question is, can Sean Payton change the on-field product? Can he change the winning or the lack of winning culture that has been here in Denver? Can he restore the previous tradition of winning? People that I've spoken to around here, that's the one question I get asked. Can Sean Payton help the Broncos win games? And I said there's so much that's contingent upon personnel and things like that. But now that we sit here, I feel like Sean Payton probably is the best guy for the job. And if Sean Payton can't do it, then I think there's some bigger issues that need to be addressed way down the road with this team.
Yes, and hopefully hopefully we don't even ever have to discuss that, Cody. Hopefully we're talking, about the Broncos at Super Bowl Radio Row here in the next couple of years. I mean, that may be wishful thinking, but look, that's the expectation in Broncos country, right? Is that the team is a Super Bowl contender. And just like you're talking about, people are wondering, can Sean Payton turn it around? I think I see a lot of things about these personalities and these ex-NFL players and these analysts are being asked, can you fix Russell Wilson, right? And that's their biggest question right now, because the perception of Russ has never been worse, right? And I think that's fair to say in terms of his on-field play, in terms of people coming at him off the field for other things as well, Cody, which we're not going to get into. But on the field, people are really just dogging this guy. And I get it. I mean, it's abnormal for him to have played the way we saw in 2022. But man, you gotta expect these guys are all talking about what did Russ do well? We heard Brandon Marshall say there's what he did well that I saw is get outside the pocket, the naked boots, all these things. Who knows naked boot better than Jake Plummer? That guy was maybe one of the best at executing the naked boot outside of John Elway. So I think that, you get Russell doing these things. That's not necessarily, let's bring back the old Broncos offense. Like Nathaniel Hackett, remember last year was talking about the long bombs to Rod Smith and Ed McCaffrey and Shannon Sharp. It's not necessarily about doing those it's not necessarily about being nostalgic. It's about putting the player in the right position that he can excel, that he can do well. Sean Payton's already talked about that. We know, I think if the Broncos fail in 2023, Cody, from the sounds of things, it doesn't sound like it's going to be Sean Payton's fault that they don't go well.
No.
I think he wants that pressure on his shoulders to say, look, if we don't play well this year, it's not going to be because I didn't game manage well. It's not going to be because I didn't put the players in position to succeed. It's not going to be because the right players aren't out there on the field. It's, and I'm not saying he's trying to throw the players under the bus, but what I'm saying is he's accepting that pressure of saying, I'm going to do everything possible to make sure this team is successful. And like he said, it's reasonable for the fans to expect us to win.
He even said, I don't like predicting things and I can't predict things. He said, but I can guarantee you the culture will be entirely different this year. That's one guarantee he made to the fan base. And he says, the fans expect to win. He says, I expect us to win. Like, that's the standard he's holding himself to, which when you do that, there is a lot of pressure that comes with that. But you know what? He's an experienced coach. He's used to it. He's turned around worse teams. Like I said, you mentioned earlier in the show, the New Orleans Saints before he got there. They didn't know what winning was. They've never won anything. And then he came in and changed the culture, and that's always a huge thing. And you're going to do it with players that buy in. And so I think that'll be the biggest key. Who buys in to what the Broncos have going on? That is a huge question here. Well, Broncos Country, thank you so much for tuning into today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. You can get this podcast free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format or whether you watch on YouTube. We appreciate you so much. Thanks for rocking with us. We'll be back on Monday post Super Bowl 57 to talk about how the game maybe impacts the Broncos, what's next, and we look forward to NFL free agency. You get that all throughout next week. Locked on Broncos.